What's up, geeks and gamers? It's Odin coming back with a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw Ant-Man and the Wasp coming in far below the original projections. If you were watching my channel this week, I did a stream where there was an article out from Deadline saying the film was projected to make up to $280 million worldwide. The film only came in at $225 million, and though they are, of course, trying to spin it as much as they possibly can, and of course focusing on the fact that it is the highest grossing domestic opening weekend for an Ant-Man film, so within that specific franchise, when you actually break down the numbers, it's really not all that impressive compared to the previous films, especially when you adjust for things like inflation and what the likely ticket sales were for those movies as well. It really honestly is something that, based on the amount of money they likely spent on this movie, based on the amount of money that they were trying to put into this marketing campaign for the film, trying to really prop this up as the beginning of Phase 5, right? The beginning of this new era of the MCU. This is not the best start that they could have hoped out for. Now, of course, there is still a lot of, or you could say that there's some good news here, right? $225 million is definitely nothing to snuff at, but it really is making the film look like, a $600 million cap is very likely going to be the case. Now, we'll have to wait and see what the week 2 numbers are going to look like. And I think that ultimately we will see a pretty drastic drop-off, as that is very typical of most modern-day MCU films, not only because the films themselves tend to be very front-loaded, but also because the films recently have just been downright garbage. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania is absolutely no exception to that. So let's go ahead and dive into the numbers. So first off, domestically, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, $104 million, and so this is what is being projected right now as its opening weekend. Disney was saying it was expecting around $95 million. The industry was saying it was around $105 million. And then with the 4-day holiday with President's Day being tomorrow, they were expecting it to be maybe around 115 to 120. And though that is definitely the highest as far as the domestic opening weekends for any of the Ant-Man films is concerned, as far as number of ticket sales is concerned, there are a lot of question marks really next to it about how much better is this film actually selling compared to those other films. And we'll actually talk about that in just a moment. Coming back in the number 2 spot is once again Avatar: The Way of Water, dropping 15%, still making another $6 million there. As you can see, $657 million. I do not think that this film is going to be able to catch that of Top Gun Maverick. I think Top Gun Maverick is going to hold the domestic crown for 2022. But hey, Avatar: Way of Water still well over $2.2 billion, easily getting the international and worldwide crown. As you can start to see, it is starting to lose out on some theaters, but still doing very well, especially with it still doing very well in those higher priced ticket seats and theaters. Magic Mike's Last Dance from Warner Brothers dropping 33%, which is not the worst drop in the world, except you take into account it added 1,538 screens. So that's basically what I had said I thought was going to happen last weekend, being the Super Bowl especially. I thought that, hey, they're only releasing it at 1,500. Maybe they're trying to get a good word-of-mouth campaign, releasing it in more theaters this weekend, and maybe they'll expect it to do better. Did not happen. Again, the film, typically when you see a massive increase in theaters like this, you typically see a bump in revenue because it's available in more places, meaning you have the more opportunity of getting revenue. Nope. This film actually got cut by a third, which I think speaks to the film itself. I have not seen it yet myself. I have not seen the second film, and I don't really want to, because the second film was not done by the original director, Steven Soderbergh. He's come back for this one, but I don't want to see the second one to see this one, and I'm kind of that completionist where I feel like I would need to. And let's just say the film does not seem to be doing all that well, though of course it did not have the highest of production budgets. We'll dive into what the likely profitability or lack of profitability is for that movie, though, in just a minute. Puss in Boots, though, continuing to do very, very well 9 weeks out from its initial release, $5.2 million, only a 6% drop from last weekend. So remembering that last weekend was the Super Bowl, again, you would expect there to be kind of a bump for some of these movies, and so that's why I think you're seeing a 15% decrease for Avatar, not a higher one. 6% decrease for Puss in Boots. So clearly a lot of families going out this weekend to go see that film. And then rounding out the top 5 is a 28% drop for the third weekend of Knock at the Cabin, which is also just not very good, nothing original whatsoever, and is already 3 weeks out, being dropped from over 1,000 screens. Now, the film is set to make its money back, but Universal, it seems, said, okay, this film is really not doing all that well. If we leave it out in just enough theaters, make some space for some other things, the film will make its money back, and that's all we can really hope for the actual movie. Interesting, nonetheless, to see what they're doing with that. There were also some new releases that did not make it into the top 5, but made it into the top 10, at least in the case of Marlowe, another open road production with Liam Neeson. This one seems to be less of an action-oriented one, but again, I don't quite understand this relationship because these films almost never do well. as far as box office numbers are concerned. No budget yet being reported for that film, at least not anywhere I can find it as recording of this video. And so we'll have to wait and see exactly what those numbers look like when all is said and done. Also, you had a very limited release of Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. So only at 434 screens. So be on the lookout for a theater near you to have that film. So Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, $225.3 million. So this is, again, far below the $280 million that was originally being projected by Deadline and other so-called industry experts. And so what that tells me is that, one, it came in just about what the domestic sales were, but the international market is still very much a huge quagmire. It's still very much a very hard thing to crack. You look at a film like Avatar: Way of Water, which is able to do incredibly well. They're making almost $1.5+ billion in the international markets alone. Compare that to a film like this where, yes, it was able to be pretty much right on the mark as far as projections are concerned for what the prognosticators were talking about domestically, but internationally coming in well below that. Again, this film supposed to have made $280 million, ends up being 225.3. That is abysmal. So they can try and run with it and say, oh, well, they just don't like the sci-fi elements. That's just something that, Asian audiences are saying something about Asian audiences not really liking the sci-fi genre all that much, and that we said that could hurt the film. Yeah, but there's could hurt their film, which is like $5-10 million difference. When you go from 280 to 225, yeah, that's a little bit more going on than that, right? There's a little bit more going on than that, and I think a big part of it is just the fact the film, just from the basic trailers alone, just didn't look all that interesting, looked very artificial. And I can confirm, having seen the film, it was incredibly artificial, and do not be surprised if this film ends up having a massive drop-off. You were hearing before about how there was all this talk about the film being compared to the other movies, saying it's the highest grossing. So when you adjust for inflation, and this is actually using a lower metric, so this is using the end of 2022's metrics. It's actually gone up since that time as well, but ultimately the differences in numbers is not too drastic. This goes up, I think, to 76. This goes up to around 91 or so, and so you do still see about a $10 million increase from that of the last film, Ant-Man and the Wasp, but still, it's only about a $10 million increase. Then when you compare ticket sales, you see, okay, there's about a 2 million ticket increase between Ant-Man 2015, Ant-Man and the Wasp 2018. You only see about, again, a $2 to $3 million increase in ticket sales. So that is really not all that impressive, especially when you have to take into account that when you look at even the 2015, right, there were some 3D showings, I'm sure, for that movie. So that's tickets, that opening ticket sale numbers right there probably is actually a little bit lower when you take into account the higher than average ticket price. This is taking the average ticket price for 2015, for 2018, in order to get those numbers. And so that is not taking into account the individual film's average ticket sales, because if a film sells more at premium theaters like IMAX or 3D or Dolby or whatever it might be that it gets a release at, that obviously means there's less tickets that are being sold for a higher price. And so again, I think that ultimately you're looking at a franchise that ultimately just does not sell a lot of tickets. But again, the way that they're trying to push us is, it's doing so well. It's doing so well domestically. It's just, again, for its franchise, it's doing incredibly well. Even then, you look at the numbers, you're like, yeah, but when you actually break it down, when you actually, one, put them on somewhat equal footing by adjusting for inflation, and then also put them on equal footing by saying, okay, what about ticket sales or estimated ticket sales? Okay, yeah, only a couple million more. And keep in mind that these films cost about $60 to $100 million less than the estimates for Ant-Man and the Wasp. So for that extra $60 to $100 million you spent on Ant-Man Quantumania, you got an extra 2-3 million tickets. And again, there's a lot more premium format screens these days than there were back in 2018, and especially back in 2015. So this number probably is even lower. So not a very good start, especially with all the news about all these things being pushed, right? You have The Marvels, which was supposed to be a huge summer box office hit, getting pushed all the way to November. Likely some reshoots is what the rumors are going on about, but ultimately that's just a terrible, terrible move and a terrible sign, right? You would want your film to come out over the summer, especially if it's good. That makes me think, okay, maybe they're starting to realize people are getting tired of the MCU and the typical garbage tier crap that we're getting. Anyway, going into the other films, though, Avatar: Way of Water, $2.2 billion there. Also, I'm going to call out, of course, Ant-Man and the Wasp. It is the first of the MCU films in a very long time to get a full-fledged release in China. And there's, again, 440,000 is what's being reported right now. I believe this film only made about 20 million or so in China in its opening weekend. Still, a lot of that, 75% of that going to the CCP. Once again, Disney, Avatar, Ant-Man owns them both. Millions upon millions of dollars going to the CCP. Screw you, Disney. Magic Mike's Last Dance, $37.7 million. Really not all that impressive, but I look at that poster, I'm like, that's not really my kind of movie, but hey, if that's the kind of movie that you want, that's fine too. Steven Soderbergh did something very similar where the marketing campaign made the first Magic Mike film seem like it would just be a beefcake movie. Ended up being actually a pretty well-crafted film because it's a Soderbergh movie. So I thought, hey, maybe they'll do the same this time around, but I'm not really hearing a whole lot about this movie, and so I don't know. If you've seen the film, please let me know if Soderbergh basically is able to come back to his roots or not. Puss in Boots: The Last Witch, also doing incredibly well here, $422.5 million. This film, unfortunately, also did get a release in China as well, so this film is giving money there. This film was okay. Some people were kind of hyping it up a little bit too much, but it's still doing very, very well, especially compared to its first 2 weeks. Definitely a chart breaker in many aspects, in many respects. Knock of the Cabin at $47.2 million, and lastly, 80 for Brady at $32.2 million. Looking at the box office charting, because we love to do some charting here, we can do some projections for Magic Mike's Last Dance, as we have this week 2 numbers. Last Dance, I gotta sing it every time. Right now, we're projecting the film to make somewhere between $53 and $75 million by the end of its run, which means we can project the film to lose somewhere between $38 and $25 million. So actually a fairly decent loss for this movie when all is said and done. And let me go ahead and actually update this number real quick, because those are, of course, the current week 2 numbers. I'll go ahead and show you how I do this live. So all this is pretty much automated at this point. So you can see here's the total box office. So that was what it was for week 1. Here's what it is for week 2. So now you see currently $47 million in the red. And we're tracking also Knock of the Cabin, 80 for Brady. Right now they're looking at 78 and 77%. So actually very similar numbers there compared to their first 2 weeks. The difference, of course, is that 80 for Brady cost a little bit more than Knock of the Cabin. So whereas Knock of the Cabin is going to make its money back, pretty much guaranteed at this point, 80 for Brady, not nearly as much of a guarantee at this point in time. I can also update the movie Plane, which I did not really talk about a lot because domestically it hasn't done much of anything in a long time. But this film did get a later release internationally, and some of those numbers are starting to show up. As you can see, it's more than doubled its first 2 weeks. And that's a very good sign. Right now, only $6 million in the red. So there's still a chance for the film to eke out a break even by the end of it. But again, it's going to be interesting to see where that falls. Also, another film that got updated, of course, Avatar: Way of Water. $2.2 billion means $655 million in net gain profit, if, of course, you believe the $460 million budget that's being reported. And the last film to update is Wakanda Forever, because this film also saw about a $10 million increase, as this film did get a late release in China and also in a couple other places. Doesn't look like it's going to be nearly enough to push it. Some people said it's going to get to $900 million. No, I said $800 to $850 million. So it's looking like, again, that was before even the China release was officially announced. So now that we know of China, I would say 875 probably would be a max at this point based on where it's going to be. I don't see this film having enough, though, to get to the $900 million mark at this point in time. Still was able to make $138 million in net gain profits. I know some people have said that the marketing budget for this film was higher than what was being mentioned or being talked about. But there's no actual official public confirmation on any of those things, and so take that with a giant grain of salt. Ultimately, though, we look at Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. We're looking at a film that likely will be able to make its money back, right? The basic, the estimated box office budget, again, I looked around for it. I hunted for it, in the words of John Campea, and I couldn't find it, at least at the recording right now. Right now, the projections, though, are that it costs around $200 million. That's kind of the standard for most MCU fare. And so that means the film needs to make $500 million worldwide to break even. I still think that film absolutely has a chance of doing that. Let's say it even drops about 60% or so in its second weekend, or even higher than that. You're still looking at the film easily breaking $300 million, probably getting close to $400 million. And then at that point, it just needs to kind of, skate along to cross 500. But I think $600 million tops is kind of where I'm standing right now. But we'll know a little bit more once those week 2 numbers actually drop. And so what are y'all's thoughts? Have you seen Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania? Are you surprised that the film came in well below the $280 million number that was being projected for this movie? Let me know your thoughts about that and anything else I mentioned in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button and smash the rumble button as well. And all the major platforms, you can find us over at Geeks and Gamers. To make sure to support our locals channel as well, as we are doing tons of new things every single day. And of course, lots of stuff to come from the Content House down in Orlando. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. A blessed Quinquagesima Sunday. And as always, God bless.